humanly they were faced with these very impressive speakers, these opponents who wanted to kind of pull these Christians back towards Jewish ways of doing things and ways of thinking. And it seemed very impressive, it seemed very powerful what they were calling people back to. But wonderfully, we would have seen, if you were here, or if you weren't, and you watched it, you'd see that Christian ministry, what each and every one of us can be involved in, who's a Christian here, and should be involved in, is actually the most glorious thing going. The only thing that displays how great and good God is. It's a ministry of surpassing glory. We saw it was a work where God transforms the worker. As we look at Jesus, we become more and more like him. So today we carry on. We're going to look at Paul's defence of his ministry, of the ministry that all Christians can be involved in, of telling people about Jesus. Continue to ask that question: what stops us losing heart in Christian ministry? And if you weren't here last week, just a recap, there's a word that's going to come up a lot, and that word is glory. And last week I said that has kind of two big components to it. First, glory means greatness or goodness or power or wonderfulness. And the second part of glory is a kind of public display of it, or a need for it to be displayed. So we could say glory is greatness put on show for the world to see. That's a kind of working definition for what glory is. And another thing I said last week is this part of the letter is a bit like hearing one side of a phone conversation. We can only hear what Paul is saying, but we can make a careful guess the kind of questions he's answering based on how he responds. So as we begin to look at chapter 4, the first question that kind of seems to be hanging in the air, as it were, between him and these Corinthians is something like, okay, well, if your ministry is so glorious, why aren't your methods more impressive? If your ministry is so great, why isn't it more effective? The method, the way Paul goes about telling people about Jesus is being questioned, and whether that actually works is being questioned. Remember, he's being compared to these kind of slick, effective, clever-sounding speakers. If you ever come into contact with a kind of salesman, they've got all the pattern, haven't they? They know what they're doing, and whenever all the people that come to the door to try and get you to sign up to charities, they're almost ready. Whatever question you ask, they already know what they're going to say in response. It's almost like that kind of very effective, impressive speaker versus a child who's doing their first sort of speech in front of the class at school. That's kind of the comparison here between Paul and these other speakers. They're promoting this wonderful sounding thing. So this question of method or technique, presentation, how do we actually go about telling people about Jesus, I think is a live question for us today as well. People will look at census results or kind of data from the Church of England, and they'll say, well look, church attendance is dropping year on year, and so on and so forth. Whatever you want to read into that's a different matter. But people will do that and say, okay, well there must be something wrong with the message, because people aren't responding, or there must be something wrong with the method, the way we go about it. And so some people's solution will be to say, okay, well, the bits that our society doesn't like, let's sort of edit them out and minimise those, because that'll get people through the door. So that's one option. Or other people will kind of uncritically promote kind of the world's ideas to bring Christianity closer to what the world thinks. So perhaps a very kind of self-help or psychology-based or counselling-based sort of view of the world with a bit of kind of Christianity put on top. Jesus is here to make me feel happy now and make my life wonderful now. Others might encourage a particular program. If you do these steps, then people will become Christians. Or if you encourage people to have this sort of supernatural encounter, well, that'll be it. That'll be the kind of silver bullet, as it were, that will get people. So I think it's a question that we face today. It's a question Paul faced then, this idea of method. How do you go about it? Is it effective? And Paul's answer to this challenge about his method is twofold. First, he says, well, the method suits the message. And second, that the outcome depends on the power of God. Or another way, the message determines the method, and God gives the results. So if we have a look down there at verse 2, it says, rather, because we have this glorious ministry, the message about Jesus, his life, death and resurrection, we renounce secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, we do not distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. So Paul says this message about Jesus is too glorious, too important to risk using these tricks, these tactics designed just to get bums on seats. The implication here perhaps is that Paul's opponents were doing these sort of things, perhaps could have been accused of it. Someone told me the other day about a kind of speaker that goes around conferences, not a Christian speaker, just a business speaker, and they intentionally delayed the lunch break until 2:30 because apparently when people are hungry it's not just more food they'll buy, it's kind of anything they'll be more likely to buy. And that's the kind of sort of thing that maybe is in view here. Things that are designed to manipulate people or trick people. Either way, Paul says there's two things that he doesn't do and one thing that he does. So first, he doesn't use deception. He does nothing that could be accused of being secret or shameful. Perhaps ministries that seem all about gathering in money, or ones that would set up a so-called healing service, but actually have someone planted in the audience who will come up and pretend to have been healed, or emotional manipulation or bullying to get people to sign up. These methods, Paul says, are utterly inappropriate to the glorious message of Jesus. Second, he doesn't distort the word of God. Now, we don't need to look around Brighton, do a bit of research online, you'll find plenty of people who would be Christians or would claim to be Christians who distort the word of God, who will say, well, yeah, the Bible does allow things that it doesn't, or saying God's judgment isn't real when it is, or saying that Jesus isn't the only way to God. And you can see the appeal of doing that, can't you? You know, it's easy to see how, well, if I don't have to tell my friend that God judges sin, that you know, they're fine, they don't need to change at all, then, well, it'll be easy to get them to come if I can just talk about how much God loves them. You know, if only I didn't have to tell people that certain ways of living aren't wrong, then people would listen to me more, wouldn't it? It would take away that barrier. And actually, it kind of, that's what we see, isn't it? That those who distort the word of God are often those who are celebrated in our culture because they're contemporary or they're relevant or they're bringing Jesus to a new generation. That they're the ones that are happily invited on the TV and the radio to talk, or at least invited on to be appreciated rather than kind of slammed and sidelined. So you can see the appeal of that method of distorting the word of God to make it easier for people to accept. But of course, by distorting the word of God, one begins to lose the glorious message of Jesus. And the more and more you take away, the less and less you're left with. I don't know how well this illustration will strike you, but it's what I came up with. So if you think of an inflatable beach ball, you can all imagine an inflatable beach ball, and they're kind of made, aren't they, of about 6 kind of half-moon shaped bits of plastic, all kind of fused together. So let's say you think, actually I don't like the red panel of plastic, I'm just going to take that panel of plastic away. You're not left with a beach ball, you're left with a pile of plastic. So, anyway, whether that makes sense, I don't know. But the point is, if you take something away from the beach ball, you don't have a beach ball anymore, you've got nothing, you've got rubbish. And in the same way, with the message of Jesus, if we cut out judgment, that one bit we don't like, well, the glory of Jesus' death taking that judgment is lost. If you cut the moral requirements, well, the glory of God's purity and holiness is lost. In short, we dishonour this glorious message of the gospel if we think it needs tricks or traps or techniques to get people through the door, and we rob it of its glory if we distort the message. So the implication is, don't be tempted to fall into that trap of using crafty techniques. Don't be tempted to change the message just because we think it might make it easier for people to accept. So those are the two things Paul didn't do. But what about the thing he does? At verse 2, he set the truth forth plainly. Paul wanted to make it as simple and as clear as he could. He wanted that message to be front and centre. He wanted people to see Jesus and understand what he'd done and to get the glory of it. Actually, that's why if someone like me or Grenville or Julian or whoever is speaking at the front, it's really important that we're clear. And so actually, if you hear us speaking and we're not making sense or not being clear, actually maybe afterwards just kindly, gently come up to us and love us by saying, maybe that could have been a bit clearer. Now maybe these opponents of Paul were using big, long words, the jargon, the latest lingo, all the kind of technical vocabulary, and it sounded great, it sounded really clever and really high-level discussion. But perhaps that meant people couldn't understand. And actually maybe that might have been part of the appeal. If we're the kind of people that think we're quite clever, actually a simple message, we might just think, well, that's too simple, surely there's more to it. There's something more complex. Perhaps it was that pride that was being appealed to by these other speakers. But Paul says no. I want people to be in no doubt what this message about Jesus is. So it's worth asking ourselves, would we be able to set the truth forth plainly? Do we understand that message about Jesus coming and dying and rising again well enough that we could explain it simply and clearly to someone else? Well, if not, then we should make it a priority to be able to. So Paul says we don't use methods inappropriate to the message, but we do set the truth forth plainly. Why is this? End of verse 2. So we commend ourselves, we kind of make ourselves look good, as it were, to every man's conscience. So Paul makes sure the way he communicates, when he speaks about Jesus, isn't a barrier. It doesn't get in the way of people following him. Following Jesus, that is, not Paul. So a common objection that you might have heard to Christianity is, people say, well, those Christians did terrible things in the past, and then they'll say, oh, there's terrible Christians today who do horrible things. And that's kind of their excuse for rejecting Jesus. They're not even rejecting Jesus necessarily, well, they are deep down, but on the surface they're not. They're just rejecting Christians. People use the bad behaviour of Christians as an excuse for rejecting him. This shouldn't happen, says Paul. Or people just can't understand the message because it's explained in a confusing way. That shouldn't happen, says Paul. Now maybe you're not a Christian here this morning and those sort of excuses or reasons sort of spin around in your head. Let me say, let Paul say, don't let the misconduct of people who are Christians or have claimed to be Christians keep you from Jesus. Jesus hates this kind of hypocrisy or lack of clarity, actually not just as much as you do, but more than you do. We see here the only reason people should have for rejecting Jesus is that they reject Jesus. Not that they point at Christians and say, well, they don't make sense, or they're just in it for the money, or they're not trustworthy. And it seems to me there is something very kind of almost relaxing and refreshing and encouraging about the simplicity of what Paul talks about here. We can be tempted to endlessly look for the next big thing, the next method, the right course, the right event, the right way of talking or explaining about Jesus. But Paul says, be clear, give no excuse based on your behaviour. That's it. Yes, we want to be wise, we want to be sensitive to the people we talk to. We want to use the minds God's given us to work out the best way to do things, to learn from experience. But I think there's something really encouraging about just saying, talk as clearly as you can about Jesus. Do it in a way that means people can't use you as an excuse. be encouraged. Actually, proper gospel ministry isn't rocket science. If you can explain about Jesus and you seek to live a good life, no matter who you are, you're good to go. Doesn't matter what qualifications you have. Doesn't matter how confident you feel, how many answers to difficult questions you know. Can you be clear? Do you seek to live a good, godly life? Then you're good to go. Paul's method suited his message. That's the first part of his defence. But the second part is the outcome is dependent on the power of God. So, Paul, why is it you don't see, if your method's right and your message is glorious, why isn't it you see more results from it? That's the kind of whispered question in the background here. Verse 3, even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ. Paul says the reason people don't respond is because they've been blinded to the glory of God displayed in the gospel message. It isn't because the message or the method are wrong, but because the God of this age, Satan, the devil, has blinded people's eyes to the light of the gospel. And we've experienced that to be true. I'm sure all of us, or many of us have. We think Jesus is great and we talk about him, but it just sort of bounces off people. Or we talk about Jesus and we know he's great, and then people come back with a really kind of odd objection. I remember one person once said, what happens to animals in heaven? Will my cat that I had that died be in heaven? And I said, well, I'm not sure. Probably there'll be cats, but probably not your cat. And that was kind of, she was like, oh, okay then. And that was almost her excuse for not being any more interested. I mean, there was deeper stuff going on, as we see. Actually, she was blinded to the glory of Christ by the devil, but that kind of silly, odd excuse can come up. Or people aren't even interested in hearing the glorious message because they're sort of vaguely content with life as it is. It's saying here that when people don't respond, it's because they've been blinded by the devil. They're actually unable to see how good this message is, unable to see the light of truth. And now that's encouraging in one sense, because it means that no human method is going to shake that cover free. That reinforces, isn't it, what Paul said about he doesn't need to have all these tricks and techniques. Actually, in the end, they wouldn't work anyway. Now, that's quite a hard truth to kind of approach and think, well, I'm explaining something, but people can't see the glory of it. But actually, I think it also encourages us because it kind of explains why, doesn't it? We don't, why people do sometimes meet us with a blank face. I don't know whether you're, whatever you're kind of into, if you're into a particular football team and you want to go to someone and talk about how great that football team is, and you're really excited and really enthusiastic, and someone else that you're talking to turns around and goes, oh yeah, I'm not really bothered about football. The temptation can be for us to think, oh, maybe football's not quite as exciting, or maybe it's not quite as good or as interesting as I think. And I think that can happen with us. We know Jesus is glorious and he's good and great, and we talk excitedly to others and they just ignore it. And the temptation can be for us to think, oh, maybe he isn't so great, or isn't so good, or isn't so interesting. Because surely if he was, they'd see it. Well, no, actually, the problem is with the hearer, so to speak, in this case. It's the devil that has blinded people's eyes. I think that can be an encouragement, because it means actually we don't need to think Jesus is less glorious because other people can't see it. It's the fact they can't see that's the problem, rather than the fact that Jesus isn't glorious. So don't be discouraged. People don't respond because they can't see the glory. Well, why do we carry on then? Why do we talk to people if they can't see the glory? What's the flip side? Verse 5. We don't preach ourselves, a human attempting to overcome the blindness of the devil, but Christ as Lord. Verse 6. God, who said, let light shine out of darkness, made his light. You know that God who we work for, can overcome it. So Paul addresses this objection to his method and their effectiveness. But there's one final thing that is kind of brought up against him to say, well, are you sure, Paul? And that question is something like, well, why is it you suffer so much? If this God of yours is so powerful, if your method is blameless, if your message is so glorious, surely the logic of the world goes, well, if God's on your side, life should be a breeze, should be filled with great signs of blessing and prosperity. Maybe again, these speakers that were coming against Paul, perhaps they had it all together. Perhaps they looked very impressive and promised great things for their followers, leading to all sorts of success. Why do Christians suffer? Why do those who take a stand for Jesus always seem to be the first to get shot? Why is it across the world, throughout history, that Christians have been subject to some of the greatest persecution? The kind of thinking behind it is, well, surely suffering is evidence that something has gone a bit wrong. Look at this, what Paul says about his life in verse 8. Hard pressed on every side, perplexed, persecuted, struck down. Paul knew what it was to suffer for Jesus, specifically suffering as a result of seeking to live for and share him with others. Most of us will, to some degree or another, understand that suffering can come, that does come from following Jesus. For many of us it will be the fairly minor but still hurtful kind of snide comments, or the sort of atmosphere of fear about speaking out for Jesus. Maybe it will be holding back of a job opportunity or an advancement. For many worldwide, it is the danger of death, or of, in some ways worse, constant kind of torment and persecution and oppression. I know someone who I think was probably bullied out of a job because they were bold for Jesus, and someone else who took a risky decision for Jesus and has been unemployed for a year because of it. Suffering comes when Jesus is spoken of plainly. And of course this would make sense, wouldn't it? If the world, people can't see the glory of the message because they're blinded to it, well, they're going to reject it. They're going to be aggressive against it. You know, we might be able to cope with our church life feeling quite small or insignificant. We might be able to understand and withstand those frustrations of people not turning to Jesus. But when suffering comes to our door, that's something that can cause us to lose heart. Our energy is sapped, our sleep is stolen, our comfort and security can vanish. So Paul, he's still in good cheer, still got some reason not to lose heart? Yes, says Paul. 2 reasons for saying it. First, Christian suffering has a point. The second, Christian suffering comes with incomparable compensation. So let's see verse 7 what Paul says about Christian suffering has a point. We have this treasure, this great gospel message about Jesus coming, dying to take our place for sins, being raised to new life again. We've got this great message in jars of clay. So that's a bit like saying we've got Michelin star cooked food, the best food in the world, but it's been put in some plastic Chinese takeaway containers. Or we've got the greatest novel ever written, but it's in this horrible coffee-stained, scruffy old notebook. The amazing message of Jesus is found in the lives of ordinary, unimpressive, breakable humans. And because, Paul says, verse 7, it is to show that the all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. That's why Christians suffer when following Jesus. Because God wants the world to be in no doubt that he is the one providing the power, that without him the whole thing would collapse. Return to verse 8, hard pressed, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. A Christian may be allowed to suffer even to the edge of death or beyond, to actually being killed, but it will always be accompanied by that sustaining power of God. So as people look at the suffering church, the persecuted church, what do they see? They see the glorious power of God, which is able to sustain people beyond normal limits. Actually, that can be one of the ways that God removes that blindness from people's eyes, as they see the power fully displayed. That's what Paul's saying there, verse 10. We carry around the death of Jesus, suffering, so that the life of Jesus can be revealed. Verse 11, we who are alive being given over to death, so that life may be revealed. God-empowered suffering is a means of evangelism, of showing people something about Jesus. It's not pointless, it's not out of God's control, it's not a sign God doesn't care. And we often see, we know this is true because the Bible tells it, but we often see how this is worked out in practice in places where the church is heavily persecuted. You know, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on China or the church there or its history, but it certainly has been a country that has persecuted Christians and said, we don't want religion, we don't want Christianity. And this is something I picked up in a paper article. It's predicted that by 2030 there will be more Christians in China and more churches than there are in America. And we heard from the guys that went to America, they came back and said, basically, you know, there's a church on every street corner. Now, not all of them are faithful, but the point is it's a nation that seems to be, wanting to follow Jesus. And it's predicted that China will have more Christians than that by 2030. And then this guy, Professor Yang, here's a quote he said about that situation. Mao was the kind of leader who thought he could get rid of Christianity or religion. So it says, Mao thought he could eliminate religion. He thought he had accomplished this. It's ironic. They didn't. They actually failed completely. So they persecuted the church and tried to destroy it. God's power was massively displayed, and now the church is growing exponentially. As Christians are pushed beyond their limits and forced to rely on God, it becomes plain for all to see the power of God is at work. So one outcome of Christian suffering is a revelation of God's power and glory. Now that isn't an easy truth, is it? We might not be abandoned in suffering, but we are persecuted. We might not be in despair, but we are perplexed. Suffering is real, it's painful. Saying God allows it so his power displayed is hard to hear. So how is it we keep going when this is the case? Well, in verse 13, Paul quotes from a psalm, a kind of song from the Bible's songbook, Psalm 116, and it's a psalm that's full of the writer speaking of his suffering. He talks about the cords of death entangling him, and yet committing himself to trust the Lord. So then Paul goes on in verse 14. He knows that the same God who raised Jesus from the dead will raise us up with him and bring us into his presence. How are we sustained in this evangelistic suffering? By remembering who God is and what he has done, and trusting him to do as he has promised. If you're suffering for being a Christian, well, look to the cross and know that God loved you. At that wooden stake that was in the ground that Jesus was hung on, that is God putting a stake into history, saying, I love you. This proves it forever. If you're suffering for Jesus, look to the resurrection and know that actually the worst someone can do to you is kill you. But can God not raise you back to life? Will he not bring you back with a renewed, glorified body? Remember what God has done objectively in history and know the truth of his love, even when a suffering for Jesus seems to blind us to seeing it in the present. Or how about this? Look at what this outcome is of this display of God's power, verse 15. Grace is reaching more and more people, causing an increase in thanksgiving to the glory of God. The Christian suffering has a purpose, and that purpose, amazingly, is the very thing we want: to bring people to know Jesus. But that's what's been happening in China, isn't it? And countless other places. Christian suffering is not hopeless or helpless. It's an opportunity to prove the power of God to a watching world. Now there's plenty there, isn't there, to be encouraged, to stop us from losing heart, to help us keep going, even in the toughest times. But Paul has this final kind of crescendo of glory to reveal to help us not lose heart. Verse 16, outwardly we waste away. He doesn't deny the reality of suffering and its effects. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. That's becoming more like Jesus every time we look to him. But it's not just being renewed for the sake of it. It's to prepare us for the incomparable compensation God gives. Christian suffering comes with an incomparable compensation, incomparable reward. Verse 17, our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Paul says that the sufferings, all the sufferings of the here and now, will seem light and momentary compared to the weight of glory that awaits us when Jesus returns. Being tortured because you follow Jesus, light and momentary. Having your possessions taken from you, light and momentary. Being held up for national public mockery, light and momentary. Being put in prison, light and momentary. Being laughed at, being bullied, being criticised, light and momentary. Being insulted, having to flee your home, having your church burnt down, being raped, being killed, light and momentary. The point isn't to say our suffering now is trivial. No, far from it. The point is to show just how glorious our reward, our compensation will be with Jesus. Being tortured, being killed for Jesus would be a horrid thing to go through. Pretty much one of the worst things you could imagine. So how wonderful must the new creation be? For something as bad as that to seem light and momentary. And do you see, the greater the depth of suffering, the greater the weight of glory must be to make it seem light and momentary. Imagine that, I have a pair of scales, and in this hand we have all the suffering of now, all the difficult things for Jesus. And then in this hand we have the weight of glory. Now if we put suffering in this hand, we start getting weighed down this way. But actually, in the other hand, you have to put a very heavy weight to counteract it so that you balance if it's in a scales. So the point he's trying to make is, the heavier, the greater the suffering now, therefore, the greater the weight of glory, the greater the good things we must get to counterbalance it, to make it seem as though it weighs nothing. And Paul says, when we look back from eternity, the scales will tip infinitely in favour of the weight of glory. That will be so much heavier. And it's kind of wonderful to think about in lots of ways. God created a world where we can sense things, we can taste and touch and hear and smell and feel. And, if we can enjoy things now, imagine how good the things we can taste will be, the things we can touch, the beauty of the things we can look at. And that's not even getting started on the fact that we will have God himself to gaze on, who is infinitely beautiful. That every day, forever and ever, we could look at him and appreciate and enjoy his beauty more and feel happier and happier, going on forever and ever. So it's not minimising suffering, it's maximising our understanding of glory. Can't understand the depths of your own or others' suffering for Jesus? Or how mind-blowing will eternity be? Feel crushed and discouraged about Jesus now and his work? Imagine how excited, how energised you'll feel about him in eternity. Feel worried, feel fearful now about talking about him. Imagine how peaceful, how bold you'll feel talking to him in eternity. Who else has a hope like this in suffering? Who else can look at the deepest suffering and say, yeah, eternity is going to be good, isn't it? You know, if you're not a Christian, how do you understand suffering? What hope is there? Is there a hope there for you? Now that's a really hard task, isn't it? Because the suffering is in our face and that stuff is off in the future. Well, that's why verse 18, Paul says to us, look to what is unseen and eternal, rather than what is seen and temporary. We know, because of Jesus' death and resurrection, that we will receive this permanent, eternal reward as we trust in him. We just need to make that effort to pull our eyes up from the suffering, the difficulties, and see through it to that eternal mound of glory waiting behind. So we do not lose heart, because we have a glorious message. We do not lose heart because we're being transformed as we look to Jesus. We do not lose heart because we don't have to use tricks and traps. We don't lose heart because we can stick to the message of Jesus we have in the Bible. We don't lose heart because we know God holds the outcome in his hands. We don't lose heart because we understand why people don't see the glory of Jesus like we do. We don't lose heart because our suffering for Jesus is neither hopeless nor helpless, but in fact part of the way God shows his glory to the world. We do not lose heart because the greater the suffering, therefore the greater our eternal reward must be. We do not lose heart because in exchange for this temporary life here, where we may suffer for Christ, God gives us an eternal weight of glory that outweighs all else. We do not lose heart in Christian ministry.